All right, welcome to Rebel Transmissions, the show where the Force will be with you. Today we will be discussing the 1999 film Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and joining me is a panel of fellow Star Wars fans. I'm your host, 𝘚𝘩𝘗𝘗𝘓. Today I'm Darth Zellick because my attitude to this movie is definitely the dark side. Up to you, Marcelo.
Hi, I'm Marcelo Nostroza. I am a writer, a podcaster, and a YouTuber.
Dan? Dan's on here. I don't know if he knows that.
Hi, yeah, I'm Dan Lackey, founder of Rebel Transmissions. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us.
DK.
Okay, I'm DK. I'm also a writer and a podcaster, and usually a pretty big Star Wars fan.
Usually. This is going to be interesting. Philip.
I'm Philip Leavenworth. I'm a writer and a very big science fiction fan, and Star Wars is a fandom that I'm very passionate about, and I've got into plenty of arguments with people online, especially about this film, so I'm looking forward to us getting into it.
All right. So, first question up. What are your earliest memories of seeing this film? And we'll start with you, Marcelo.
My earliest memories of seeing this film is watching the pod race on a VHS copy of this film that I had, and being obsessed with the announcers and how dumb they were. Every time I saw this movie as a kid, I was wondering, there's something wrong with this film. Like where is the seriousness? There was no seriousness in this movie at all. It was just so even as a kid, I thought that I felt that there was something wrong with it. Now, listen, I'm not saying that this movie doesn't have any cool parts, because it does, but I really don't like this movie is overly boring to me. It doesn't work for me.
All right, Dan, you got thoughts?
Yeah, I think I remember seeing this film first, just going to the biggest screen that was local in my home city in Scotland. I don't really remember that very much. What I do vividly remember and enjoy remembering, I guess, it's seeing it in 3D, and especially the pod race in 3D. I thought just looked amazing.
DK?
I had a friend who worked in the local cinema at the time, and they said, "Hey, do you want to come over and watch it from the projectionist booth?" And so I said, "Yeah, sure." So yeah, the first time I saw this, it was in its first run, and we watched it from the projectionist booth. I want to say I was blown away by it, but I would be lying. So, but yeah, it was a cool experience. So, yeah.
Philip?
I saw it when it came out with my dad. My little brother at the time was afraid of watching movies for some reason, so he didn't join us. And I remember watching it and thinking it was cool, because at the time I was 7, so I could identify with Anakin. But as I got older, I realized that that's still bizarre, but we'll get into that, I'm sure. But no, I didn't notice the problems, at least not as many of them when I was younger. And so I think, yeah, there's a specialness to the film because I got to see it in person. It was my first Star Wars I got to see in person, so that'll always stick with me. But the rest is another conversation.
For myself, I can't remember what month the movie came out, so I would have been 13 or 14, depending. And it was the first movie I got to see at the newly built theater with 8 whole screens instead of 2 screens and seats where you wondered what disease you were going to get from sitting on them because they were so old. Because that's life in small town British Columbia for you. but it was super exciting to go see it in this big screen. And it was Star Wars. Cause I mean, the original trilogy for me, there was no surprises. Like I knew Darth Vader was Luke's daddy and all that because it had been pop cultured to death back, back before I got to even see it. Cause the movies, like yourselves, I wasn't even born yet. But I remember sitting there with some friends of mine, and one of my friends got booted out because he threw ice cubes at the screen when Jar Jar Binks showed up. Because he's like, who is this fracking idiot? And he just lost it. And for myself, I remember being so excited because I was looking at the names like, Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, Sir Christopher Lee, like big names, like big icons of film, and sitting there going, what happened? Like, you got the best names in the industry doing this movie, and this is what you came up with?
Well,
So I was like, I went from totally excited and being like, oh yeah, look at these big names. This is going to be an amazing film. These are like British thespians. These guys are on the level of Sir Patrick Stewart. Like Christopher Lee, I believe, was friends with him. But I'm like, what the heck is this mess?
So today is actually not only the overall 25th anniversary of The Phantom Menace, it's also the 25th anniversary to the day of the Canadian release of the film.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. And I'm a Canadian, so I should know that.
Shame on
But
you.
yeah, to me, this film was just because you can have the biggest and the best in Hollywood. I mean, Natalie Portman was still at the beginning of her career then, and she's gone on to do amazing work. Like, I have nothing but respect for the lady. But it's that, to me, this film was proof that just because you have an amazing franchise, an amazing fan base, and the best actors in the business, unlike the original trilogy, which was mostly unknowns, that you can seriously screw up.
Yeah, I mean, as I've gotten older, I really started wondering, and I don't know this because I'm not as big into Star Wars as I am Star Trek. I was wondering, did George initially have the idea to direct all 3 films himself, or did he want to get other individuals to do it for him? Because I was like, if I was George, I would do the same thing I did with I would do the same thing I did with the original trilogy. I would get other people to direct these films, and I would just write the scripts for them. But I don't know if he did that or if he had no options.
I don't know. I think he wanted to specifically direct these films.
Okay.
I think it was supposed to be like his big comeback to directing and writing was these prequels. But
Right.
from what I understand, I think the thing that went into him not directing episode 5 and 6 was strictly just, him being more focused on his family and, him kind of wanting to step back from it because it became an overnight success. I mean, nobody knew that it was going to become what it became, and when it did, even it took him by surprise. And
Well, it was designed to sell toys.
well, I mean, that's what it definitely became because Fox made the dumb decision we're going to give him all the merchandising rights. That won't blow up on us at all. So
Yeah. Star Wars was literally written to sell huge amounts of toys.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy part is that the Fox company and all of them, they thought that the movie wouldn't make any money and that, whatever. And boy, bad.
That was the inspiration for the scene in Spaceballs with yogurt showing off all the Spaceballs merchandise. That's where the inspiration for that scene came from. Was that decision.
I've heard through the grapevine that the reason why George decided to do the prequel series in the first place was because he was so injured and so taken aback by the cancellation of the young Indiana Jones trilogy that he was like, you know what? Since I'm not gonna get to do young Indy, I might as well do my Star Wars prequels that have been rattling around in my brain. Does anyone on the panel know if that's actually true or not?
I couldn't say.
I think there might be some truth to that, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. So that's kind of I get that one. We might have to leave up to researching on the internet, and even then, we might fall into arguments.
Yeah,
All
I mean,
right.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, the film introduced new cultures and characters like the Gungans and other aliens. And how well do you think that expanded the universe?
I thought it was fine, but the main problem that I found with most of the characters that were introduced, they were just dumb. they just came off as so.
Misa's so offended.
Yes, they came off as so like casually offended. I don't want to say the other word, but it just didn't work for me. It's like, if you're going to introduce new races, that's great, but make at least one of them serious. Don't make them all funny. Like I don't even know what species Jar Jar Binks is, but his leader, that
Gungan.
He's a Gungan.
Gunga is how George Lucas pronounced it.
Right.
Oh,
right.
sorry. Could be my Canadian accent too.
Yeah,
right.
It's all right.
Well, the leader of the species that Jar Jar Binks belongs to, that guy is so, like, every time I look at him, I'm like, you are not fit to be a leader, sir. And the way that you talk makes me not take you seriously at all. Like, you need to, like, I don't know, but
Misa like this.
yes,
Yeah.
I look.
Yeah.
Look. All due respect to these actors, because they were doing what they were told.
Yeah.
That's where, like, I really think that George kind of forgot that his original trilogy was a mixture of adventure, and yes, it was for kids, but he took the subject matter in the original trilogy very seriously, and it's like he forgot that, and he's like, I just want to make a movie for kids now. I'm like, what?
I'm gonna
No.
throw this out there. I always thought the Gungans were Star Wars pack lads.
Okay.
I guess that's passable.
Because it just, I mean, the way they speak didn't initially grab my notice, because I'm like, okay, we're used to Yoda doing the noun verb reversals and stuff like that. So I thought maybe he was just trying to do, something like what he did with Yoda and the way Yoda speaks. Because Yoda reverses everything, but like as soon as I saw Jar Jar Binks, I'm like, what the heck is this clown? Like,
I think when it came to the original trilogy, yes, it was George Lucas's show, but you had people around him that at some point would say, "Steady on, George. This is a bit extreme." And I think when it came down to the special editions and then later the prequels, he was kind of unbound by studio interference as such, because it was such a juggernaut, such a money maker, that he was surrounded pretty much by yes people. And so whatever George said at that point kind of went. And I with the best will in the world, I mean, I can watch it, and there are, I could say that about the very worst Star Wars. I mean, prior to the recording, we were talking about the holiday special, and there is some rough stuff in the Star Wars universe. But I can always find something in whatever movie it is to kind of latch onto that is almost its saving grace. There are a couple of elements here that do that, but I think this is the most out of the prequel trilogy, certainly, where I think George's tendencies may have had to have been reined in a bit in order to make it a little more accessible.
Yeah. I'm really happy that you said that, DK, because if you guys were lucky enough to have the DVD special editions that came out shortly after these films finished their theatrical run, there is hours of special features of George Lucas looking at footage, and everybody around him, like, their faces are obviously terrified, but nobody says a single thing.
Well, I think the only one who says anything is the editor, and he's just like trying to tell George like why something doesn't work, and then he realizes that he just isn't getting through to him, and he just gives up, and it's amazing.
Right. Do you guys know who is actually the producer of these prequels? Because there's this one guy that always comes up in this conversation with the prequels, who always says George had the best ideas ever, but I can't remember this guy's name.
I can't remember his name.
Is it Rick McCallum?
I can't either.
Yes.
Yep.
I think it was Rick McCallum. I've always wondered, why did that guy, like, oh God, like, I understand believing in someone's vision. I really do. But there had to be a point where he was like, this is not working.
Mm-hmm.
George Lucas directing is on the par of William Shatner directing, and we all know how that went.
Yeah, well,
So, some people should just not direct.
I don't know. I mean, I think I wouldn't class Final Frontier alongside A New Hope by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah,
It's,
I mean,
I think when Lucas does direct and he is told, all right, whether it's by producers, whether it's by those around, whether it's by the actors, I mean, Harrison Ford famously said, you know, you can write this shit, George, but you can't say it. I think the problem is, you know, when he is unconstrained by people, and I think that's down to the actors, and yes, they did have thespians like, you know, Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor, and they had Natalie Portman, but I think it was at a point where, honestly, a lot of them were just stoked to be in this universe because, you know, by this point, it was pure gold. Everything that was Star Wars was just a moneymaker. So I think a lot of people went into this thinking, yeah, I'm looking at a big screen, I'll just act what I'm told to act, and then at the end of it all, it'll all come together. And it just kind of didn't.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Marcelo.
No, I'm sorry. And to the point of George not being a serviceable director, I kind of agree with that. I really agree with that. But the one grace that I will give George is before he changed his life with Star Wars, he did a little movie called American Graffiti.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked that quite a bit. And that movie was directed really, really well. So that movie always gives me a false sense of security. I go, you did such a good job handling the camera and everything, with everything in this film. Why couldn't you do it for it's always baffling to me. But as creative individuals, everybody here knows that everybody has a bad day at the office.
Mm-hmm.
I think for George, his bad day at the office was directing Star Wars films, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right. So another point. Anakin building C-3PO was a connection to the original trilogy. Do you appreciate this link to the films, or did it feel forced?
I do not. Forced, yep. I 100% agree with DK. Completely forced. That's unnecessary because in the original trilogy, C-3PO and R2 get introduced to Luke Skywalker by way of Jawas, and it seems so implausible that his father built the robot that he gets to meet later on in life. It's just that doesn't that doesn't seem plausible to me. So definitely forced. Yeah.
I'm gonna take a different tack. I never thought it was forced because one, as far as I know, Luke never finds out that C-3PO was built by his father, and they always made a point that Anakin was a mechanically minded, genius, essentially. He's almost like the Sheldon Cooper of Star Wars. But look, to me, it didn't feel forced because with droids too, and I mean, this came up even in Star Trek and other franchises, droids, unless they're terminated, they live forever. And so to me, it didn't feel forced, especially it would have felt forced if they'd have been like, oh yeah, your father made this droid. But I don't think there's ever a point where Luke finds that out because it's never said on screen that Anakin made C-3PO. But I will say, after seeing like A New Hope last night in concert, I was sitting there going, I forgot how much I hate C-3PO because I hate him. He is so abusive. And he's so depressed.
I could understand it if it was just a droid, but there reaches a point where coincidence just becomes lazy plotting. And I think that's what it felt like to me when I was watching episode 1. There's a brilliant, I don't know if any of you guys have seen it, little sketch, Robot Chicken, which is on, it's The Empire Strikes Back, and he says, Luke, I am your father. He says, no, that's impossible. And I also built C-3PO. And he says, no, that's not very likely. Yeah, and and then he gets onto midichlorians and things like that, and it gets to a point where you just think, okay, you can try and fill in the blanks a little too much, and I think that's where the movie went wrong for me. It would have been great had the downfall of, say, if they were going to go with Naboo and the whole Trade Federation thing, if you were already past that stage. I think they were just trying to cram too much into it and tying everything together. I just think it lost it. But that, your mileage may vary.
Yeah, I guess for
I have
me,
to
it's
wonder if
always
maybe
been-
they just brought them in because the pair of them, I know, like looking back at reviews from the time and stuff, C-3PO and R2-D2 were considered to be one of the highlights of the original trilogy, like their banter back and forth and their, sort of love-hate relationship, like their frenemies and all that. I have to wonder if it was just they were just trying to do that to make sure that there was something there for the older fans to enjoy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's just like C-3PO being kind of shoehorned into this. Just it's the worst tendencies for fandom, where we got to give some kind of fan service to the audience, and I just feel like when you do something like that, you're making your universe that's supposed to be really, really big smaller, and I feel like that is done to the detriment of the franchise, and I don't understand. I mean, I understand why he did it, but I don't like it.
I almost think of them as Timon and Pumbaa, to be honest.
Well, I mean, that's the thing too. Like R2-D2, his appearance in this makes sense, at least in the way it's created. That seems organic to me. But when the C-3PO thing comes up, it's so out of left field that it just feels inorganic, and that sounds strange.
So so this one will be a fun one. Do you have a favorite scene or line of dialogue from the film?
Well, favorite scene, I think this is a cop-out for a lot of folks who talk about this movie, but the lightsaber fight between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul, because that thing is level. I mean, that thing is all sorts of awesome. And and this is coming from someone who got tired of the ballet lightsaber fights later on in life. But yeah, that scene always sticks out when I think about this movie, which is not often, but it always sticks out.
We try not to think about it too much.
Yep.
Yeah. I've got
What about you, Phil?
On that one.
When I'm thinking about, one of my favorite lines from the thing, at least the one I quote the most, is there's always a bigger fish. So that comes up quite a lot, I think. But scene, I guess the Duel of Fates is pretty good, but I mean, I would go with the pod race. I mean, I think it's still exhilarating because I saw The Phantom Menace a few weeks back, the first time I'd seen it on a screen since I was a kid, and I think it still works as a sequence, and I think that's still one of the more memorable things aside from the Duel of Fates.
I'll drop a trivia fact on Duel of the Fates. When John Williams composed it, the lyrics you hear, the choir singing, is actually from an old poem about a battle among forest entities.
Interesting.
Yeah, I found that out recently.
Makes me
I
think of
really like the pod race, like I said earlier, but also I really like the, there's a bit where it seems to be like the only scene in the entire Star Wars franchise, movie franchise, where you see like Force Strong.
For myself, to this day, and I hate C-3PO. I hate him second only to Jar Jar Binks, but he has one of my favorite lines when he's talking to R2 the first time, and he's like, "My parts are showing. Oh dear." And as somebody who's had roommates over the years, there's been, the odd instance where you walk out with a towel around yourself, or, you're not you might be in a bathrobe and pajamas. And that's been my go-to line every time something like that happens, or when I've been cosplaying and I've had a wardrobe malfunction. That's my line, like, my parts are showing. Oh dear. Like,
Yeah.
to me, that's my line from the whole thing. As far as scenes go, give me Duel of the Fates anytime.
I really like the line of dialogue. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. Hate leads to what Yoda says.
Oh, the hate leads to fear, fear leads to anger, anger leads to like death or something, and that leads to the dark side.
suffering.
Yeah. All right, so this film features a lot of alien characters like Uatu, Sebulba, Newt Gunray. Which one stood out for you the most, for good or bad? So let's leave Jar Jar off the table because that's low-hanging fruit.
I would have to say, and these guys just threw me back because they're the first aliens that we see in the film. Those individuals that are freaking out about the Jedi showing up at their spaceport.
Yeah,
Every time I see those, I'm sorry?
Nemoidians.
Nemoidians. Every time I see those guys, I go, "You guys are a walking lawsuit." I hope you know that. Yeah, no, but yeah, I mean, yeah. So those guys always stick out to me anytime I watch this film because I just think they're awful.
I actually like Sebulba. He's kind of interesting to me because one, that I mean, obviously he's all CG, but I just like him that he's Anakin's rival, and he actually does make a good rival for him. And with the implication that Anakin's the only human who can pod race, and you see all these other creatures in the pod race like Sebulba with extra arms and appendages and ganglia, you have to wonder, like, if that's what gives them the advantage in pod racing is all these extra body parts. Kind of like Klingons having redundant parts so they can kill each other.
Yeah.
I really like the makeup of the Nemoidians, and also I really like the idea of Watto. For years, I must have forgotten like the premise of that character, but like for years, like I thought, like surely his body looks like it would be too heavy to lift by his sort of wings.
Like a bumblebee.
Then recently I read that the idea of that character, as George Lucas said, was that his body is filled with helium. So that's how
It kind of makes me think of I think it's bumblebees that are the ones that are supposed to not technically be capable of flight because of their fat bodies. That's what that's what you just reminded me of. I know it's either honeybees or bumblebees that are supposed to be like that scientifically speaking, they're not supposed to be able to fly.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the designs, some of the creature designs in this movie are really, really good. I just think that the storytelling and the choices and the directing take it all down for me. I mean, there's good stuff here. There's no doubt about that. There's good stuff in here, but I think George didn't cook it right.
All right, so bouncing off of the alien looks, what about the costumes in this film? What did you guys think of the costuming and the makeup?
Well, I thought in general, I thought the costuming was okay. I thought the makeuping on a few characters was really, really excellent. I thought that it was a mixed bag for me between okay and really great with the makeup on some characters.
I'm going to go on a limb. I actually loved the makeup job on Padme because there is historical precedent on Earth for doing something like that, hiding your true identity. because of risks to yourself. Like her makeup, there's something just so imposing about it. Like, you know, you see the makeup, the full makeup, the face, the headpiece and everything. And it's just like, you know, this is a person that brings power. At least the title brings power, and she's not messing around. Like, I actually really liked her makeup probably the most because it was just amazing. Because, I mean, in sci-fi, usually we're seeing women portrayed as, unfortunately, sex objects, or, you know, something there for a little fan service for the guys. So to see something so completely different, like there is even the actual Padme herself in her robe and everything, there is nothing sexy about it at all. And I actually really like that design choice because it's nice to see a female character that we're eventually going to, you know, see kick some butt in the second movie. It's nice to see her, you know, not being portrayed as an object, I guess. But I mean, that's coming from a female perspective, so take that for what you will.
Well, I mean,
thought it was
even from, you know.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that because her makeup makes her look like you know, sort of like a geisha. So, you know, you have this regal look to her, and you also have, you know, I mean, for the good portion of the movie, I was, you know, completely, you know, taken by it because it didn't even occur to me, even when I was a kid, that it was two different people until it was. And so I think the geisha look helps kind of mask, you know, the difference between Keira Knightley and Natalie Portman. I think that in that sense, you know, it's great.
It's interesting you say geisha because the geisha are highly misunderstood as being something they weren't. I mean, they were essentially paid dates for men, but they were not the courtesans or girls of the night that people think they were. They were actually extremely highly educated in music and dance and the arts, and their job was literally to entertain wealthy men who could pay for their time. So it's interesting you say geisha as a comparison, especially with the white face makeup.
I thought it was interesting that the actors that they chose to cast for the parts of young Anakin and Padme Amidala were she was actually twice the age of the actor that plays young Anakin.
Yeah, that's a whole bit too.
Yeah, the characters even just being that big of an age difference. The whole scene where he's like, "I care for you" and all that, it came across as a little bit creepy.
Yeah.
It just didn't, and I'm not saying that on her or on him. They were just doing what they were told. But I'm like, okay, 9 and 14 sounds a little weird to be having that conversation.
Yeah, well, every time I watch this movie, I say, okay, George, you want to do something like this? Why don't just make them both bring Anakin up, make them both 14, or make her 15 and make him 14. Problem solved. Hello, like I don't understand why he chose to start with Anakin so young. That really doesn't. That never clicked for me. I never understood why he went down that road.
Yeah, even Weird Al Yankovic comments on this saga in his Saga Begins song, which was the American Pie parody. He's like, "Did you see him hitting on the Queen though he's just 9 and she's 14?" And I'm like, that's creepy.
I mean, I don't know why the decision wasn't made just to like mirror or parallel, Luke in the original trilogy where he's like 19. Like, we don't lose anything by aging him up, and if anything, it makes the whole situation between him and Padme a little bit more, less creepy. But also, I mean, I know he's trying to market to kids, but even then, it's like, you didn't have any kid characters in the original trilogy, so why are we starting now? Doesn't make sense.
I mean, I I'm throwing this out there because you guys being guys, you might have perspective on this that I don't, but how many 9-year-old boys are interested in girls like that? Like, seriously, most 9-year-old boys are like, oh my God, cooties.
Yeah, I mean,
It's hard to say.
I started to get feelings for girls around 11. So at 9 years old, I was like, girls, they're disgusting. I don't like them. I want them all to perish in a dark fire. But that's just me.
But I wonder if maybe part of the reason why they cast Anakin so young in the Phantom Menace perhaps may have been because otherwise, like maybe fans might have said, like, how do you imagine that he goes through like all the events of the prequel films in a relatively short time?
Plus, there was the precedent that they didn't train. He was already considered too old to train as a Jedi, the same as Luke was at that age.
I read as well, like, you know, the opening scroll says there are 2 Jedi Knights, and like someone was pointing out, well, really no, because Obi-Wan Kenobi at that point isn't a Jedi Knight. He's still a Padawan who's training to be a Jedi Knight.
Well, I mean, I don't know if they were trying to do like something to where, because I mean, if you would have aged Anakin up to, you know, even Padme up a bit, wouldn't they all be about the same age? I guess Obi-Wan, everybody. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there was kind of an intention at one point to kind of, at least later in the films, to have like a love triangle between them, but it didn't really go anywhere. And so, at least from my perspective, I don't know if, you know, because I think if Obi-Wan would have been, you know, the same age as the other two, there would have been like a sibling rivalry that would have been a little more interesting to see. But maybe Lucas
I think
was trying
Obi-Wan
to avoid
was
that. I'm not
supposed.
sure.
I think Obi-Wan was getting close to the end of his teens as he's portrayed in.
Yeah, because I always thought he was like about the same age Luke would be in the originals.
Yeah.
19 or something.
Like finishing his training, because I mean, it is implied that while he's still a Padawan, that he's trained a lot. But I know too, and this is extended universe, Obi-Wan was actually considered not to have been a Jedi who had any one area of excellence. He was considered, he had the Force, he had the ability, but he, in the extended universe, it was said that he lacked any special talent in one area and that he had to train excessively hard to be at a really good, competent level where he could keep up with the others. Whereas Qui-Gon had his special talents, Yoda had his special talents, but Obi-Wan apparently was basically just, you know, Joe the Jedi. Nothing, you know, special.
Yeah, and the other thing that I really think often about this film is I think about my favorite character in this film, Jar Jar Binks. No, that's a lie. I keep thinking to myself, okay, you want to have a character named Jar Jar Binks? All right, that's fine. Why don't you make him like an actual person, or like, why don't you just change the way he's written? Have the same voice if you want. It's fine, but make him into a serious battle-tested warrior or something. That would be awesome.
Yeah. Jar Jar Binks ends up with a really bad end in the extended universe.
Okay.
I
haven't read any of that, so I wouldn't know.
I ran across this a couple years ago because it was a blog site where they were talking about what happened to some of the side characters. And apparently Jar Jar Binks, after he causes the fall of the Republic and everything else with his voting and stuff like that as a senator, apparently later on in life he spends his last years as a street performing clown type entertainer on Naboo.
Good for him. After being really shit at his job and causing a cataclysm.
All right, so moving on. Moving on, how effective are the film's visual effects, like the special effects?
At the time, they were really great. Like we've said multiple times on this episode, the pod race, the effects are great, but in retrospect, I think the years have not been too kind to them. But at the time, they were top of the mountain for me at the time.
So like the original trilogy, where the original trilogy created a lot of special effects technologies to be able to do what they did.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for me, because I watched it a couple weeks ago, I think the CGI still holds up for the most part. I think the practical effects hold up even better. I think there's just in general, practical effects tend to age better, I think. But yeah, I guess the only thing that might be a little suspect is I can't think of it at the moment. I mean, I guess
For
the
me,
biggest scene
I
would be
do miss the models.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that takes skill to do. Like, I've done a bit of theater, and to have to work without the ability of computer enhancements and CGI and have to use models and everything, like, there's a certain skill to me that goes with using models. And I mean, the special effects in the original trilogy were fantastic. I mean, if you look at the time they were created, they were mind-blowing. But I loved how heavy models featured into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if they'd have had some of that model work, it would have been better, because that shows a lot of skill to be able to do things with models.
Well, speaking about that too,
from what I've heard, the Phantom Menace is the only one of the prequels that actually uses the practical studio models.
Yeah.
All the other two just use the CGI models.
Yeah. Because I think the thing that doesn't work for me, the CGI, is I'm just kind of, I guess, used to Yoda being a puppet, so him being a CGI creature still doesn't work for me throughout all of this trilogy. So.
Is there a reason he was CGI? Like, I don't know if the puppeteer was still alive. I don't want to be rude, but
well, he was a
want to try it.
When the Phantom Menace came out, like, Yoda was represented with a puppet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I thought he was still a puppet then.
But
wasn't that Frank Oz?
That portrayed him in the original trilogy. Well, I should say voiced him. Obviously, he's a puppet there as well. So the CGI sort of replacement for the Phantom Menace. So they did the CGI model and replaced it with the Phantom Menace, and like that's even more popular than the puppet was. I did a poll a while ago to find out like which of them were more popular, and it was the CGI model that came out on top. And it's usually fans gravitate towards the CGI version in the prequels rather than the puppet, because the puppet had aged quite a bit since the original trilogy and stuff like that. Yeah.
All right, that's fair. So this one should provoke some interesting conversation. How effective is the comedy in this film, if you can call it comedy, which that last part is my own opinion?
It is awful. It is so awful I can't even think about it.
I don't find the movie funny at all unless it's laughing at how bad it is.
The one thing that this movie is good for, like, pick a word and like you could do an awesome drinking game to it.
I may or may not have done that.
I do quite enjoy Jar Jar Binks during the battle. Some of that is
What a.
My only favorite comedic line is still my favorite line, which is "My parts are showing," because I know it was said that Tony Daniels was difficult to work with for a lot of the actors, and him and Kenny Baker, who was R2D2, didn't actually get along in real life. But that line, like, it's just so C3PO, like, because he's always perpetually worried and being a protocol droid. The most horrifying thing he can think of is that he doesn't have coverings over his parts. Like a droid who's worried about being naked, essentially.
Right.
Yeah, I mean. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No.
I think what tends for me the humor with basically young Anakin taking over the spacecraft. It goes and defeats the droid control ship, which I don't really find funny. And I find it like really sort of coincidental and like a bit too coincidental that he shoots from that spacecraft, lands on the droid control ship, and shoots exactly the component that's going to blow up the droid control ship.
Yeah,
but
that is.
I guess you could say, like, was that due to like the Force? Who knows?
Dan, you just led us to the next question. In your opinion, does Anakin use the Force to win the pod race? And if so, how does that foreshadow his eventual power?
I don't think he does. I think he just wins the pod race out of talent. I don't. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
I think he uses the Force only because I can't remember if it's Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan who says it, that him using the Force is why he's so good at the pod race, because he can anticipate, even though he doesn't know he's anticipating, what the next move is. It was kind of stated flat out that he's using it.
I think in the novelization it does kind of elaborate on that to that extent, that humans aren't really good at pod racing, and the only way that he can compete is because he kind of unconsciously is prescient towards to what's coming up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I mean, this wasn't asked, but I just want to throw this in here real quick. I wasn't too pleased with George Lucas's idea to explain the Force. I thought that was the death knell of this movie, if I didn't find one earlier. Mm-hmm. Him explaining that the Force works through midichlorians, and it's all about how many midichlorians you have. I'm like, oh my God.
Well, I think a lot of that comes from the fact that I think somebody may have told him years ago that, there needs to be some kind of scientific explanation for this. And I'm like, don't listen to those idiots.
No.
Just, just it's a metaphysical manifestation of, the universe you're talking about. So don't do that. Anybody can be a Jedi.
Space wizards. Let them be space wizards.
Yeah, it should have just been left at anybody can be have the capacity to do it. And they just leave that on the table just to give us a bogus scientific explanation. I don't know. That's another thing that didn't work for me. But in terms of the pod race, I guess on a very, very subtle level, I guess he does use the Force to win the race. But it feels like he just uses his own general cunning because, he reties the one pod that gets, loose. And then he, unhooks himself from Saboba's pod racer. So I don't think any of that used the Force. I mean, other than just his general cunning. So at least that's what I would interpret it. But,
There is an interesting thing that's in the pod racer game for N64, which is that his pod is the fastest one, like he brags, but it's also one of the least maneuverable.
Yeah.
It's not an easy pod to maneuver.
Yeah, I mean, when we first, see the thing, the actual his actual pod racer thing, that thing looks cool. As a kid, I was like, I want that. But as an adult, I'm like, really? A kid built this? Come on, really? Are you serious? I do have a positive thing to say about this movie. One thing. No, I have a couple of things already, but I have one more positive thing. I really like Ewan McGregor's performance as Obi-Wan. I think he is, for a lot of folks, I think he is a shining light for those of us who are looking for things to like about the prequel trilogy, because he's really good.
I will say because having I hadn't seen New Hope in a while, and seeing it last night at the concert, the whole foreshadowing thing, like him doing the pod race and winning and stuff. I forgot that Darth Vader was he took an active role as a fighter pilot in that final run against the Death Star. So, and I mean, if you look at the way they filmed the certain sequences of the pod race, it felt very much like how they filmed that run through the trench on the Death Star.
Yeah. It was very similar. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if before mapping out that sequence, George looked at his original take on the original run on the Death Star, because it did look a bit familiar. I definitely agree with that.
Well, it's
All
great
right.
narrative paralleling. So
Yeah. If
I
you
think
could, this one should get some people's brains going. If you could make one change to the film, what would it be and why?
No, you could go ahead, Phil.
no, I was thinking my whole thing would be one change. Okay, now I got to be very, very specific. I think. Okay, I would make Naboo Alderaan.
Why?
Okay.
Because to me, I feel like when it gets destroyed in episode 4, it would have more narrative weight, because then we know about this planet, we know who's there, we know what's on it, and then when it blows up, we're a bit like, oh, this has happened. And I feel like they're basically the same planet anyway, because like sort of a royal family type deal rules over the world, and I don't see there's any reason why they can't be the same place narratively. And I feel
then
like
Leia
George
going
Lucas,
to Alderaan as an infant would make more sense too, because Leia would be going to family the same way Luke did.
well, they would assume that Padme died in childbirth, so they wouldn't even think that Bail and his wife would have had another child. They would be just enough to where there's no suspicion, at least in my mind.
Marcella, what do you think?
Yeah, well, the one thing I would change in the if there was one thing I could change about this film, it would be a tonal shift for everyone. I would make it way more serious. Like, I would probably tweak George's dialogue just a little bit and make it really, really seem serious. But with that being said, I would every now and then have a character throw some jokes here and there, just to lighten up the mood just a little bit. But overall, it would be a very, very. I would change the tone of this film drastically. I would try to make it more towards the original trilogy in tone more than what George did.
What about you, Dan?
Oh, it's a difficult one. I was thinking the obvious sort of one I think is to cast maybe an older actor as Anakin. But at the same time, like I was thinking, like I think the part of this film that I find most interesting is there's these huge faces and heads on Naboo. I found it really interesting recently to read about that, like that there are these ancient ones. I don't know if the film's novelization or anything like that goes into that, but I find like the concept of what's ancient like really interesting, and really, even though it's supposed to be episode 1, like what predates it, I find that really interesting. And I recently went to rewatch The Phantom Menace at the local cinema, and at the end of that, like they showed like a clip from the Acolyte, which will, the events of that upcoming show will predate the events of the Phantom Menace. So I'm looking forward to that show. So I'd probably like have them in the Phantom Menace, like say a bit more, or just establish a bit more about these ancient, the ancient civilization that existed.
What about you, DK?
Assuming we can include things like, just get rid of it altogether. Maybe, no offense, George. George is a great ideas man, but I think as a director, he was out of the game a little too long. So maybe a different director. If it's just with regards to the film itself, I would have set it a little further back, and I would have set it after, say, the downfall of Naboo. You're supposed to be concentrating on Anakin. Concentrate on Anakin. Do not try and tie it up with all these other stupid little narrative plot threads, just so you can bow tie the thing in a neat package, as it were.
For me, I'm gonna say director and script, because George Lucas should not have been given free rein with this one. I think he really needed pushback, and at the same time, a lot of the script, which he also had a hand in, was very cringy. Like, it's not a script that ages well. It's not a script that, I don't know, it took a lot of amazing actors and made them essentially cardboard cutouts to me. And that's doing the actors a complete disservice when there was so many amazing and fantastic names tied to this film. Like, this film should have been like mind-blowing.
Yeah, I going to what DK said and what Eve Eve said here at the bottom. I really think that this would have this would have been kind of tight for him, but I would have really loved it if Steven Spielberg would have directed this movie, and also for a script for an individual to do a script. I would have loved either Lawrence Kasdan or David Kemp, who wrote Jurassic Park. Have David Kemp, if he writes a script, and have David Kemp write a script based on a story by George Lucas. And I think if those folks were able to help George in that way, I think this film would have been very, very different.
In a way, this makes me think kind of like Queen and Freddie Mercury when they temporarily split up, and Freddie could not get a solo career off the ground, even though he was a brilliant musician, because he lacked the creative input and talents of others who complemented him. I think George Lucas really needed to employ some talents that complemented him.
Right.
I think it reminds me of the X-Files with Chris Carter, who created the show, and then like in its later years, or like when it's come back in the most recent seasons, like he's in like the season premieres and season finales, and they've been among the most reviled or whatever hated episodes of each season. So, but I think I would find it interesting, like if they changed the setting of the pod race to space, because I think so much of the pod race is so much of the film's events is set on Naboo. Sorry, not on Naboo, on Tatooine. Sorry.
Boonta Eve.
Yes.
Boonta Eve. That was the holiday or whatever it was.
Yeah, the Boonta Eve.
Yeah, I've never thought about that before. Take the pod race and move it to space. Okay. I like that.
You'd have to change the pods, though, because the pods are not enclosing. They're more like convertibles.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's supposed to attach to George Lucas's love of racers, so maybe.
Right. That is true. I mean, that was, George Lucas's love of drag racing is way evident because he did American Graffiti and with the pod race too. So
it is very much a drag race. I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
All right. This is a different question. How good is the film's soundtrack?
Up. I did say that the one positive thing about this movie was Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan. I want to add another thing to that. John Williams' score for this film is great. It is impactful. It is gut-wrenching, and every time I hear it, I'm like, I'm ready to go into battle. I'm gonna go do some stuff because it's just motivating.
Yeah.
I
Can't fault John Williams. Sorry.
I'm going to go with the technical side as a musician here. And some of the things I loved was that Anakin's theme, he literally inverted the Imperial March. Anakin's theme is an inversion or mirror, note for note, of the Imperial March, which to me was quite clever because we already knew going into the movie that Anakin is going to be Darth Vader, blah, blah, blah. So I like that little bit of mirroring, like that he twisted the music that way. And I love Duel of the Fates, like how he incorporated words from an epic poem. And I'm not saying epic as in the way people use it today, but epic as in the style of writing. I love that he had that choir there, that presence. It added a lot of drama, and it made me think of those video game sequences in the late 90s where like Final Fantasy VII, like the Sephiroth theme, where you have this big dramatic music and this choir singing, and you don't even know what they're singing, but it just sounds epically cool. And with Jedi and Sith being religious in a sense, that choral sound is something we tend to associate, even if we're not religious, we tend to associate that with religious traditions. So from a technical standpoint, and I mean, from a fan standpoint, I love the soundtrack, but from a technical standpoint, there's a lot of brilliance that John Williams sprinkled throughout that, you look at it and you go, wow, this guy really, he really knew the assignment.
Yeah. There's a story about John Williams that I absolutely love because if you guys aren't aware, he does yearly concerts at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for one of those, his special guest was the one and only Steven Spielberg. And Steven Spielberg came onto stage and said, "Do you want to know how important John Williams is to a musical, to a film? I want you to watch the opening sequence of The Last Crusade with music and without music. And the sequence without music is fine. It's directed to perfection because it's Steven Spielberg. But when the music is put in, the scene takes on a whole new life to it. It's like his music brings a propulsive beat to whatever he works on. It's just great.
I mean, going back to where I was last night, the New Hope concert, which for the viewers, they essentially show Star Wars: A New Hope on a ginormous screen, and they take out the music, and then the Calgary Philharmonic was playing it note for note, second for second live. And our conductor, he actually got to work with John Williams on the new trilogy, on the newest Indiana Jones, so he knew the music. And like, if there's one thing about John Williams, I mean, the guy has literally scored almost all the most memorable film sequences of our time. I mean, everybody knows Superman. Everybody knows Indy. Everybody knows, I mean, Jaws. I love the story of Jaws where he came in and he did a minor second on the piano and they're like, that's it. And he's like, those will become the two scariest notes in movie history, And I mean, so seeing the orchestra play the music live while you're watching the film, you get a sense of just how much work and effort goes into scoring an entire film. Like, it's not like writing a song for the radio. It's not like writing a fanfare for a podcast or something. It's this huge mammoth undertaking, and there's so much that goes into it. It's mind blowing. And that's when you really realize, like, this is how much even incidental music we have. Like, the music you don't even notice, you start to notice. And there's even a Facebook Reels thing now where they're doing they take movie scenes and they change the music to it, and it completely changes the feel of the scene. Like they'll put humorous music to a serious scene and stuff like that, or serious music to a humorous scene. So I think sometimes we forget just how much the music can make or break the film.
Yeah, and I, you know, you brought up when John came up with the brilliant notes for Jaws. I mean, the story goes Steven Spielberg came into the office on a Monday and he said, "John, what do you got?" John came over to the piano and said, "I got 2 notes for you. Here they are." And he played them, and I'm like, John Spielberg was like, "That's excellent. Let's go with that." But the importance of John Williams to the Star Trek, to the Star Wars franchise can't be understated because it's just too important.
And I mean, all the pieces are memorable, like teaching music. I have 5-year-old kids who've never seen Star Wars because their parents are a little bit like, okay, you're 5, you're not quite there yet. I have 5-year-old kids who can walk in and whistle the main theme. They can whistle the Darth Vader Imperial March. They can even whistle the Cantina Band. Like, they just know, like, instantly, even if they haven't seen the movie, you can play any Star Wars theme and they're right away like, that's Star Wars. That's Star Wars. I mean, that's a testament to the ability of the maestro to create something in that it's so instantly recognizable. You don't even need to see the movie.
Yeah, it makes me think of there's this YouTube channel that used to do epic rap battles of history. There's one with Alfred Hitchcock versus Steven Spielberg.
I love that one.
There's a line in it that's like, half of your billion should go to John Williams. And it's like,
yeah. I love those epic rap battles.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, those the epic rap battles, there's a few of them. Like, even they get into the classical composers, but to me, like, I think the Darth Vader theme is and I'm not trying to be rude because I'm classically trained, but to me, the Imperial March is literally on par with Beethoven's Fifth. It's a handful of notes that you instantly recognize.
You can see that.
All right, so this is kind of a weird question. I'm not sure how to answer this one, but what are your hopes for the future of this film? I honestly never thought this film had a future, so.
On that note, I'm going to have to duck out, guys. So, yeah. So,
right.
Have a good one.
This is actually the last.
You too.
Oh, okay.
No, sorry. I got a turnaround. I really hope that this film.
Okay, take care, Dickie.
May the force be with you.
Okay.
I actually hope that this film continues to inspire people and continues to introduce people to. Oh, I can't run away from the slide. It's ticking me off, guys. Sorry. I hope that this film continues to inspire and introduce people to the Star Wars franchise. And I hope that people enjoy it and they find something to love about it.
What about you, Dan?
Well, I'd love to see it again. I was thinking, like, I'd love to see some sort of, I don't know, like virtual reality or hologram sort of depiction of it.
Phil?
For me, I just I hope they never try to remaster this for any reason. Just leave it as it is, warts and all. Just keep it as an item in like a Star Wars museum that this happened. We can't forget it. We should never forget Star Wars Episode 1. But what I can give the prequels is that they do tell a story from beginning to end. We can all disagree with how it was executed, but I think it sets off the right stuff on some level.
For me, I'm going to compare this to the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation, in that it was a mess, but we got the payoff that was the later seasons of Next Generation and the movies. And I think in a way too, one thing that hurt the prequel trilogy, and it's no fault of anyone, I think one thing that hurt it was we knew what was going to happen. We knew that Anakin becomes Darth Vader. We knew that Luke and Leia's mother was going to die. Like, we knew everything that was going to happen in the prequel trilogy. It was just telling us how it happened. There was no surprise. And I think that kind of hurt it, because I know, like, people talk about how big the reveal of Darth as Luke's father was back in 1980 when that aired. Everybody was just like mind blown, like, what? That's his dad? Even though the name Darth Vader literally means father. But I think that it suffered from that. There was no surprises. There wasn't really a lot of room to maneuver, I guess, because they had to tie everything into the original trilogy. But I'm just hoping that it becomes one of those things like, okay, it sucks, but this will get you into the Star Wars universe, like you guys were saying, like, you know, but please no remastering. I don't think that could work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those purists who's like, you know, I don't even like the remasters of the original trilogy, and yet, you know, it's really hard to find the unspecialized versions now, but I'm lucky to have a few. But yeah.
And I mean, worst case, we can always compare it to the holiday special. Nothing could be worse than the holiday special.
Well, I mean, the good thing is it does get better after this, so gradually.
Yep.
So
I really like the remastered versions, but even then, like, I hope the Phantom Menace, you know, they don't remaster it. It's not touched like that, like adding new.
Yeah, I think, you know, in George's defense, look, I don't agree with what he did to his original version of Star Wars from '77, but it is his film, and if he wanted to get another bite at the apple by trying to make the film that he wanted to make in '77, that's great. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with any changes that he made, but the fact that he got to do it is great.
There is one scene in the remasters I do like, and I was reminded of it yesterday, which is we get to see Han Solo meeting Jabba the Hutt. Like meeting with Jabba. And I love the fact that he's talking to Jabba and he literally stomps across the dude's tail. Like, I love that bit of arrogance. And then the way he's sort of like buttering up Jabba and, like, you know, he's feeding his ego. Like, that scene is the one part of the remasters I like, because to me, otherwise, Jabba the Hutt was just shoved in there in episode 6 and he looks like this disgusting thing. Whereas in the remastering, he's, you know, he's a little more believable.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for me, it's like they bring it up in the first. They actually do mention Jabba in A New Hope, if I'm correct.
Yeah, they do.
But they don't ever show him, and I think him not being shown until episode 6 kind of offers us a tiny little bit of a reveal. But you know, if we already do that in the 4th one, then we're kind of, I think, showing our hand a bit too early, at least for me. But, you know, that scene in itself is fine, I think.
All right. So does anyone else have any other thoughts they want to throw out there before we wrap this up?
No, I'm good.
I'm
Dan?
looking forward to more shows.
All right. So for everybody watching, we hope you enjoyed this review. If you have, please definitely click the like and subscribe buttons, and may the pod be with you.